Good morning.
Good morning.
When we come to classwork, it is with the definite purpose of learning specific spiritual principles that can be applied to our everyday living. There are two major religious beliefs that we must avoid. There is the one which is usually associated with India, in which the spiritual kingdom is completely separate from this world, and therefore we are to ignore this world and not concern ourselves with it. We are not to try to make God or to bring God into the affairs of our body, our business, our pocketbook. We are to look on God as spirit and the human world as material, and never the twain shall meet. The result of that teaching is that those who follow it live up here in some kind of a vacuum on cloud nine, and they allow this world to go by while their bodies disintegrate, while their nation disintegrates, while their whole world disintegrates. The other is the general Christian belief that God hasn't much to do with this world, that we just prepare ourselves to die and meet God in the next world, while we take care of ourselves in this world. It is for this reason that in the ordinary religious teaching, even if they do pray that God give us peace on earth, they don't quite believe that God is going to do it, and therefore they see to it that we have plenty of ammunition. Pray to God and pass the ammunition is about the idea. Pray to God, but be sure you have plenty of bombs. You may have read that in the paper this morning, the latest speech from London. We don't have to be quite as worried today as we were yesterday, because England has enough bombs to wipe out Russia. So we can be a little bit more at peace today within ourselves and less fearful. And that is about the idea. We'll go to church and pray to God, but we'll be sure we have just a few more bombs, and then we'll be on the safe side. And so it is that many people pray for health and pray for the prosperity of their business, but they'd be terribly shocked if God answered that prayer and they really got well from it without the help of medicine or surgery. And so it is that in the religious thought, most of the religious thought, you have this separation of God and our universe, our daily universe. Now, when you come into either the metaphysical or the mystical approach to life, you find an entirely different situation. You find that by making your contact with God, that is through prayer, you actually bring God into the tangible, everyday experiences of life. In other words, the Word becomes flesh. The Spirit of God becomes tangible as a healthy body, or the Spirit of God transforms your business, or the Spirit of God actually provides safety and security. In other words, God, Spirit, becomes evident as the very harmonies of existence. Now, we have learned that this activity of God being made manifest in our daily life is not one of faith. It is not a believing in God, nor is it having faith that God will do something. This bringing of spirit into actual world experience has very little relationship to a belief in God or to a faith in God. It has no relationship whatsoever to the ordinary sense of prayer, that is, praying to God that He will make us well, or that He will keep us at peace, or that He will destroy the enemy. It has no relationship to that, to those forms of prayer. In other words, you enter a whole new dimension of life. That is why the Master said, "My kingdom is not of this world." My kingdom is not of this world that you've ordinarily worked with, not even of this religious world. My kingdom is something of an entirely different nature. Just as in my kingdom you put up the sword because you know that if you use the sword will be used against you. You put up the sword because you are not in that particular universe where a sword is necessary. You have a kingdom of which it is said, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit. Not by any kind of might, not by any kind of power, but by my Spirit all things are accomplished. Not by doing a great deal, but rather in quietness and in confidence and in being still, the very opposite of what we think of in this world. Now, if we are to get away from the ancient beliefs, we have to go back first to the Master and realize what he was trying to reveal to us. In order to do this, you must be able to look at the Hebrew scene as it was when he came into the picture. And you must be able to see how the very religious, most religious of the Hebrews were praying to a God to destroy their enemies or to do something for them. They were hoping that by sacrificing to God it would bring God on their side. Tithing with God would gain God's favor. Sitting in the synagogue day after day for long, long hours, all of this would be pleasing to God and gain God's favor. Holidays, holy days, feast days, all of these were aimed at bringing oneself into harmony with God and getting God on our side, or getting ourselves on God's side. In other words, to win God's favor so that God would do something. Now the Master comes with a whole new dispensation, and he says that God isn't to be found in a holy mountain or in a holy temple, that God has no pleasure in your sacrifices, and he just tears apart all of the pet theories of the religion of his day. And he tries to take us into what he calls my kingdom. My kingdom, my peace. My peace give I unto thee, but not as the world giveth. My peace. He is trying to show us a whole new universe. Now, not only through his direct teaching, but also through Paul, we see that there is a necessity to die to that old man, and also that we give up our former beliefs and convictions. You cannot add to a vessel already full. You cannot bring the new spiritual dispensation into your mind if you are filled up with all of your former beliefs. There must be an emptying out process. There must be a dying daily. And there must be a rebirth. We must be born again. Paul puts it that the natural man receiveth not the things of God, or the creature is not under the law of God, neither indeed can be. Only if the Spirit of God dwells in you can you call yourselves children of God. And the Master says only if you are reborn of the Spirit. And so it is that we must accept this, first of all, that the human being that we have been is not going to add to himself or herself the grace of God. You are not going to bring forth in or through your consciousness the grace of God unless your consciousness becomes renewed or transformed. There must be a renewing. This is clear. There must be a transforming. This is clear. It is the whole message of the Master. Clearing ourselves out, cleaning out the old vessel, being renewed through the transforming of the mind, being transformed through the renewing of the mind, dying to the old self, dying to the old teachings, and being completely born. So it is with us. When we come to the message of the infinite way, when we come to its classwork, we come with our former concepts of God erased, or at least there must be a tremendous willingness that our former concepts of God be erased, or our concepts of prayer, our concepts of the religious life. Let me show you one illustration of that. In almost every religious teaching, you have first of all the Ten Commandments. And the idea is that you conform to those Ten Commandments and make yourself a fine human being. And by becoming a fine human being, you prepare yourself to be a spiritual being. And we don't have that at all in the infinite way, because we have discovered that even the worst of human beings can be transformed in a moment without going through all that period of trying to be good and trying to live up to the Ten Commandments. As a matter of fact, it seems a little bit easier for the hardened sinner to become spiritual than the person who's going through a whole lifetime of trying to be humanly good. The reason is clear. When we have known sin, false appetites, lack, limitation, disease, we seem more ready to open ourselves to God. And we seem more ready to be humble. It's a very easy thing for a person who knows that they haven't been as righteous as they might be, or as pure or as good, to be able to say, God, I know my faults, I know my iniquities, I know my hidden sins. Forgive me, cleanse me, turn me upside down and inside out, and make me anew. And in that state of humility, you'd be surprised how easy it is to receive the Christ. Whereas the human righteous person who has succeeded in obeying all 10 commandments is very apt to feel, now God, why should I have any troubles? Look how good I am. Look how pure I am. Just look how sincere I am, and all of the nice things I've done. Why should I have to go through all of this misery? And thereby, with self-righteousness, that individual has separated themselves from God, because there is no way to reach God except through humility. Even the humility of the Master, I can of my own self do nothing. If I speak of myself, I bear witness to a lie. There's humility for a man who undoubtedly was living the highest form of human perfection, and yet could say, I of my own self am nothing. If I speak of myself, I bear witness to a lie. It is the Father that doeth the works. Not how good I am, not how obedient I am, and how church-going I am, but rather I am nothing. The woman taken in adultery, just think how quickly she realized the Christ. Why? Because she knew her sin, she knew her own lack of the good, she knew her own unworthiness, and she could open and empty herself and say, Father, I am an unworthy temple, but fill me, enter me, change me, rebuild me, renew me. And in that humility, the Master could say, thy sins be forgiven thee. You can't imagine him saying that had she said, oh, well, now, you know I'm good. I made a mistake, but you know I'm awfully good, and I went to church every week, and so forth and so on. There would have been no forgiveness. There would have been no room for it. There would have been no emptying out. The thief on the cross, the only reason he could be taken to heaven tonight was his own humility, his own knowledge that I am nothing and I have been a sinner, and I I've paid the penalty, and I realize its wrongness. I'm through. Master, take me with you. So it is in our experience. There must be a preparation for the entrance of the Christ into our consciousness, and that preparation is our realization that regardless of how good we may have been, that we also have been the opposite at times and in many ways. And therefore, we have not been fitting instruments for the divine. Then, as we realize this, not with mock humility, but actually knowing that it is so, we prepare ourselves for a new experience. Then, in our work in this way, instead of saying to our students, now you take a copy of the Ten Commandments and read them and see how you can live up to them and all the rest of that paraphernalia, we do nothing of that kind. We do not ask anyone to live up to any laws or rules or regulations, but we take the student right where they are now and point out the fact that only in proportion as you yourself recognize your shortcomings or lacks and the willingness to forsake them, only in your recognition do you open your consciousness to the Christ. And when the Christ enters in, the purification takes place. If there was sin, it is erased. If there was disease, it is erased. If there was lack, it is erased. Not because you have become humanly good, but because the Spirit of God has entered. And here's the difference. Now watch this, because it is a major principle of this teaching. You never can be good. You never will be good. You never can be loving. You never can be just. You never can be charitable, and you never will be. And the sooner you awaken to that, the nearer you are to your redemption. Why? Did not the Master say, why callest thou me good? There is but one good, the Father in heaven. When a person wants to be good or just or charitable, they are inflating their ego. They are not inviting the Christ. It is only when we have given up the desire to be thought good or worthy or honorable or just, and are willing to say, if there is any good in me or flowing through me, it is God, the Spirit of God. And whatever good qualities I possess is really the glory of God shining through, not my virtues. Now you see, this has to be the preparation for the Christ experience, because eventually we on this path want to be healthy, and we want to have an abundance of supply, even be wealthy, if you want to use that term. But we never can be. It doesn't lie within the province of anybody to be healthy or to be wealthy. If you have sufficiently died to yourself, if you have sufficiently cleaned out the old vessel, you will know that only the Spirit of God is the health of your countenance. Not I am healthy, but God is the health of my countenance. Not I am successful, or I am wealthy, or I have an abundance, but the infinity of God is showing through. It is a complete setting aside of personal ego. It is a dying daily. I can't be good. If I speak of myself, I bear witness to a lie. I can't be charitable. If I speak of myself, I bear witness to a lie. I can't be healthy. I don't know how to be. But if there is a health of my body and my mind, it is only because God fills the mind and the body. And therefore it is God's glory showing forth, not my health and not my supply, not my wisdom and not my virtue. If there be any goodness in me at all, it is God flowing through. So you see that instead of building up the ego by pointing with pride to how many of the 10 Commandments I can fully obey, we throw every bit of pride aside, every bit of ego, every bit of self-righteousness, and acknowledge I am an empty vessel. And whatever there is of good is God's grace. Just think of this. Thy grace is my sufficiency in all things, and then turn around and say, I am good, or I am healthy, or I have understanding. Do you see this? God's understanding is infinite. If we say, I have understanding, we have set up a barrier between ourselves and God. If we say, I am spiritual, we have set up a barrier between ourselves and God. If we say, I am nothing, I of my own self can do nothing and be nothing, it is God's grace that is the allness of my being. It is God that is the health of my countenance. It is God that fills my purse. Then there has been a complete emptying of the self, and there has been a rebirth into that self which is spelt with a capital S. God, the divine self of my being. Now, God's selfhood is pure. God's selfhood is infinite abundance. God's selfhood is immortal and eternal. It has no trace of disease. Therefore, our entire effort must be to realize the meaning of thy grace is my sufficiency. Not my righteousness, not my purity, not my charitableness, but thy grace is my sufficiency. There have been people accumulate a lot of money and become very philanthropic, given away lots of it, been very charitable, and through one circumstance or another have come on bad days, lost their money, become bankrupt, and then ask themselves, or someone else asks, why? This was such a good man or woman, so charitable, so kind, and gave so much. Yes, and that's what brought about the bankruptcy. This belief that I am good, or I am charitable, or it was mine that I gave away. Oh, there's such a virtue in giving away my money. But you see, there is no such thing as my money. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And if some part of it comes into our possession, it isn't that we possess it, it is that it has been given to us by a grace. It isn't ours, it's still the Lord's. Many people do not realize that until they come to the probate court and find they leave it all behind. And then they'll know that it never was theirs. No, if it was theirs, they could take it with them. It never was theirs. It never is anybody's except the Lord's. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and whatever comes into my possession by God's grace is merely God's grace flowing through me. And it is for this reason then, if I share it, if I give it, it isn't that I am philanthropic or I am giving away anything of mine. I am merely acting as a transfer agent for the owner, seeing to it that that which belongs to God has some distribution among all of God's children. Now, this word humility must be understood. It should not be used in any mock sense or any sense of self-righteousness. It should be used in the absolute sense that whatever grace is mine, the grace of health or the grace of morals or the grace of health, wealth, the grace of happiness, is not mine but His that sent me, and then it is mine in infinite abundance to share, not to store up where moth and rust doth corrupt, but to share. So it is. When you come to the infinite way, you must have certain specific principles with which you work. And the first one is always your preparation, because the Spirit of Christ cannot enter the natural man, the ego man, the I, me, and mine man, the self man. The Christ can only enter the vessel that is emptied of self, the vessel that can say, God is my mind, God is my life, God is my soul, even my body is the temple of God. All right, God, use me. All right, God, manifest in me and through me. And then I won't turn around later and say, oh, this is me and mine. I will keep right on acknowledging, Thou art the health of my countenance, Thou art my supply, Thou art my bread, meat, wine, and water, and always there will be the acknowledgement of Thou, or He that is within me, and a lessening of that word I, or me, or mine. No. It is in this same way that if I make the assertion that God constitutes my being, that I'm on very dangerous ground unless I acknowledge that this is the truth about everyone on the face of the globe, white or black, Jew or Gentile, Occidental, Oriental, Jewish, Protestant, Catholic, Vedantist, Buddhist, unless I can acknowledge that the truth of God is a universal truth, that the life of God is the life of man, not Jewish man or Christian man, but the life of man, all mankind, I'm on dangerous ground, because I'm again building up an ego, even to the extent that I must acknowledge God to be the selfhood of every sinner. It makes no difference that the sinner may not yet be aware of his identity, or the dying person aware of their identity. I must acknowledge God is their identity. This may help them to awaken to their true identity. The only reason that the Master could take the Magdalene along the rest of his ministry with him as his most ardent follower, and take the thief into paradise with him this very night, was because he knew their true identity to be spirit. And his knowing that helped to awaken them to what they were missing by not knowing their true identity. And so with us. Ego would have us believe that because we are Christians, or because we are metaphysicians, or because we are mystics, that we are something special that other men are not. This is dangerous. This is a building up of the ego. This is utter nonsense, because whatever truth is universal truth. 2 times 2 is 4, whether you apply it in English, French, German, or Sanskrit. 2 times 2 is 4, whether you apply it to apples, peaches, bananas, or millions. In other words, a truth that is truth is a universal truth. Now, the truth doesn't make us free, but knowing the truth does. And when we begin to know, consciously know, God constitutes my being. Whatever of good there is in my experience is the good of God. Whatever health I have is God's grace being made manifest. Whatever supply I have is God's grace being made manifest. Whatever degree of purity or morality or integrity that I may exhibit is not me and not my virtue. It is the grace of God being made manifest. And when we universally know this truth, we have cleared ourselves for further progress on the spiritual path. Now, this principle automatically leads us to another. Since we are the fulfillment of God, since God has fulfilled himself on earth as us, since God is living his life on earth as us, no one has any evil in them. Everyone is God manifest. Regardless of what dream they may be entertaining, regardless of what concept they may be holding of themselves, the truth is that God constitutes man. Now, when you come to this, you come to that which has puzzled the ages, and that is, how do you reform us? How do you get our sins out of us and the penalties of sin? And how do you get us on the right path? And here you have one of the specific principles of the infinite way, which, unless it is understood and practiced, makes almost impossible the attaining of harmony. All evil, regardless of its name or nature, is impersonal. It does not belong to any man or woman. It does not have its rise in any man or woman. No man or woman is responsible for the evils that are in them or the sins they commit. No matter what a person is, that's what they are, only because of circumstances beyond their knowledge and ability to control, but not because of any evil nature in them. I wish that all of our students could have the opportunity of witnessing some prison work, because it is only in that prison work that you can actually see how completely true this is. Because when you go into the prison, you are faced only with criminals. You are faced only with people who are there because of some violation, and not only violation, but usually severe violation of the law. And if you were to judge by appearances, here you have bad men and bad women. Well, all of the years of trying to reform these people hasn't succeeded. There is only one type of work that has brought universal success to prison work. And that is the metaphysical type of work in which you go into the prison and do not claim that man is a sinner, but rather that God constitutes this man. Actually realizing that the grace of God is this man's perfection, not his own goodness, but the grace of God, and that the evil is not of mankind's own doing. It is something imposed on him. We might look at it this way. A person may, for most of their life, be completely honest, and then all of a sudden be forced into some position of lack or limitation and be tempted to steal. And the circumstances may be such that they do steal. And then we say they're bad. Now, all of their lives up to this moment, they've been good. All of a sudden, they're bad. Heavens, no, they're not bad. There isn't a bad bone in their body. There isn't a bad thought in their mind. They are in a position where they are indulging wrong, and even knowing that it's wrong, because of a circumstance beyond their immediate control. It is the only way they can see at the moment of solving their problem. If they're caught and go to prison, then of course they're bad. But they aren't, and they never were. That deed was something imposed from without by circumstances. It was not by the nature of the individual. You discover, as you deal with a spiritual ministry, that men and women are not bad, that men and women are not sinners, that men and women are not even sick, and they're not even poor. None of that belongs to man. All of that is a universal and an impersonal claim or appearance, and the individual has just picked it up because of their ignorance of their true identity. If a child were born and their parents taught them from the beginning, God constitutes your being, the very life you live is God life, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and God is always saying, Son, all that I have is thine. And that child is brought up to understand you don't need that which anyone else has, even when it starts to reach out for other children's toys. If it is taught in the very beginning, all that the Father hath is yours, you need nothing that belongs to anyone else. God has fulfilled himself in you. God is the health of your countenance. God is the infinite supply of your being. God is the satisfaction unto your mind and body. You would find out then in the later years that when temptation came, as temptations do come to most people, that it would be a laughable matter to that child, because the remembrance would be there. All that the Father hath is mine. All that the Father hath is mine. And you would find that in a normal way and in a natural way, its needs would be met without stealing, lying, cheating, defrauding. in the same way. When the world would be talking of danger from enemies, from epidemics, from depressions and panics, this child would be remembering, thy grace is my sufficiency. And there'd be no fear of temporal powers. There'd be no longing for living by the sword. There would be no desire to use temporal means, temporal protections. There would be a song inside always. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Man shall not live by the sword, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Man does not live by man-made laws, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. And so it would be that this individual, who had never had to be cleaned out of old concepts and beliefs, but has from the start been taught the reality of the spiritual universe, this individual would have no difficulty with outside temptations of health or lack or fear. We, however, who have been brought up with two powers, and usually the evil power much stronger than the good power, we, of course, have to be cleansed. We must die to the belief that there is power in evil. Whether that evil appears as an epidemic or as an enemy country or ideology or government. We have to be reborn into the realization that man does not live by bread alone, man does not live by effect, man lives by the grace of God. Oh, now you know, you could teach that statement to 1,000, 10,000 normal Christians or Hebrews or others, and it would have no effect upon their lives. It wouldn't do a thing for them. Why? They are still cluttered up with, yes, thy grace is my sufficiency, but the other fellow has more bombs, or the infection has more germs, so forth and so on. In other words, while we volley back and forth between good and evil, even giving us such a truth as thy grace is my sufficiency would not do much for us. First, we must empty out. First, we must impersonalize. First, we must realize man is not evil. Man is an instrument for God, a transparency through which God's life is made manifest on earth. In this very series of work that we have had these 2 weeks on this trip, that very thought was brought forward forcibly. Supposing you close your eyes for a moment and look out on this world, any part of this world that you like, and try to see what it looks like without a man, woman, or child on earth. Just look at the most beautiful part of it that you want to see. Look at a city or look at the country and see it without a man, woman, or child, and then ask yourself, where is God's glory? Where is God's glory? How is God's glory made manifest? No birds in the air, no fish in the sea, no animals, no humans. Where is God's glory? And soon you would see that the very moment a man, woman, a child, a little dog or cat runs down the street, you're beginning to witness God's glory on earth, God's presence on earth. This whole world is meaningless without man, woman, child, or animal or bird. This whole world is meaningless. It's an empty nothingness. It could just as well be the barren moon. But you see, if you want to find an evidence of God, you've got to find living life. And then you begin to see, that is the reason for mankind. That is the reason we are on earth. Here is the place, the transparency through which God becomes evident. Here is where we find love, life, truth, benevolence, sharing, cooperativeness, when there is man. So you'll find that our real function on earth is to show forth God. Then, with that in mind, and the old concept of man as part good and part evil wiped out, you can then say, now I can understand why it is. God's grace is my sufficiency. I am on the earth to show forth God's infinite goodness, God's eternal life, God's immortal substance, God's entire being. That's why we are on earth. But that is why everyone is on earth, and therefore the evils of this world do not belong to man. They are encompassed in something that Paul called the carnal mind. Now, the moment you see this, the moment you can translate sin or disease or lack from man to the carnal mind, you have taken the first step of working with an active principle of the infinite way. You now begin consciously to separate any form of error, trait of character, disposition, sinfulness, poverty, disease, age. Separate it right from man and realize that's not part of man. Man's function is to show forth and glorify God. And this other thing is separate and apart from man. Actually, it is that which Paul called the carnal mind, or which in metaphysics today is called mortal mind. When you have separated it from man, so that every time you look at someone who seems to be full of sin or disease or lack or age, and you can move it aside. Oh no, that's no part of man. Man has only the qualities of God. Man is on earth to show forth God's glory. And this appearance, these appearances, are entirely separate and apart from man. They belong to that which we call carnal mind or mortal mind. Now, this is a specific principle, the same as the principle of emptying out, the principle of dying daily. This is the next principle, because here really begins bringing God into your actual experience. When you can acknowledge that your purpose on earth is to glorify God and show forth God's glory, not yours, God's righteousness, not yours, God's health, God's wealth, then you can say, now we'll take these appearances and move them over here into the carnal mind. When you have done that, you're ready for the next step. The next step is what makes healing really assured. When you separate the evil and put it out into that carnal mind, and then ask yourself, does evil come from God? Did God glorify himself on earth as man and then put something destructive into that nature? No, that would be like God committing suicide. God didn't put poison into himself. God didn't put sin into himself. God did not put disease into himself. None of these things are of God. And so when you've got all these qualities out in the carnal mind and then realize they are not of God, you have nullified them. Because if they're not of God, they weren't made. God made all that was made, and all that God made is good. Therefore, when you have removed these erroneous traits, qualities, activities, and impersonalized them, and then look upon them and see if God didn't make you, you have no power. You have no ordination, no authorization. You are not of the kingdom of God. God has no pleasure in your dying. Turn ye and live. And as you look then and realize that none of this is of God, none of this carnal mind, none of these traits of dictatorship, none of these traits of bossism, none of these traits of carnality are of God, you have nullified them, because if they're not of God, they have no ordination, no authorization, no divine origin, and they're nullified. So you see that when you begin to work with infinite way principles, you have to know the truth. You have to have certain specific principles to work with and work faithfully with them until you really come to see that it is possible to nullify any and every appearance of discord. But by working with it, by seeing clearly that if it is not of God, it cannot be of man, because man and God is one. I and my Father are one, and I embody the qualities, the quantities of my Father. Then whatever is not of my Father is not of me. Then what about these erroneous traits that I have? They are not of me, they are of the carnal mind, therefore they are without authority, and in that way they are nullified. Thus, prayer or treatment in the infinite way is really this knowing of the truth of man's eternal nature and man's function on earth as the transparency as which God walks the earth, and the understanding that all that is negative is not ordained, not authorized, has no law to sustain it. In this knowing the truth, or prayer, or treatment, you nullify the appearance and bring forth the original harmony that was always there, but hidden by this belief in two powers, hidden by the belief that man is a sinner. Man is never a sinner. Man is the instrument, the transparency for God. Man is always that which is to show forth God's glory. In fact, man is God's glory walking the earth. Man really is God's glory walking the earth. And anything of a negative nature does not belong to man, and the realization of this begins its overcoming. So you see that in this work there are these principles which must be understood and practiced until we are so completely emptied of the nonsensical beliefs that we are part good and part bad. that we're partly divine and partly human. Actually, there isn't a human element in our makeup. We are entirely divine, and whatever there is of the human apparent is imposed from without and can be removed by the understanding that it is not ordained of God and is not supported by any law of God.